Good evening, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to News in Focus. My name is Faraz Patel. I'd like to thank you, the viewer, for staying with us here on Hilaal TV, DSTV channel 347. Yesterday, International Relations Minister Ronald Lamola said his department is committed to see South Africa's case against Israel at the International Court of Justice through to its conclusion. Lamola revealed this while briefing Parliament's Portfolio Committee on International Relations, Cooperation and Justice on Wednesday regarding South Africa's case to find Israel guilty of the Rome Statute on genocide. South Africa has already submitted its main arguments to the ICJ. Joining me now to have this discussion, I'd like to welcome the spokesperson of the International Relations and Cooperations Department, Chrispin Phiri. Chrispin, good to have you on. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me, Mr. Patel.
No, absolute pleasure. Chrispin, given the significance of what we are seeing now within the Middle East, just 2 days ago, the attacks in Doha, Israel's continuous aggression in Syria, in Lebanon, and yesterday we saw in Yemen, how important was the statement from the minister in maintaining this case against Israel?
The viewers might benefit from this distinction is that the Rome Statute holds individuals accountable, and that's the International Criminal Court. The Geneva Convention holds states accountable, and that's the ICJ, and that's where we are. You may recall that there is a warrant of arrest out for Mr. Netanyahu and his defense minister at the ICC. There's also a warrant arrest out for the leaders of Hamas for the October 7 incident. So those are there. And of course, even that ICC warrant was on the instance of South Africa, also insisting that we do need to see accountability around what has happened during October 7 and many other incidences prior to October 7 as well. What the minister said yesterday was quite important, and it occurs in the context of what we are seeing more broadly around international law. We are seeing, Mr. Patel, a wanton disregard for international law. As we speak today as well, just yesterday or the day before yesterday, we also saw in Russia an attack on civilian targets and not military installations, where pensioners got killed, quite frankly. As we speak now in Sudan, the worst humanitarian crisis that really goes beyond scale, unimaginable. It makes what we are seeing in Gaza look futile, what we are seeing in the DRC as well. So what we are saying, quite frankly, that this case in Gaza actually brings international law at the center of the multilateral system. And if you have a system that cannot enforce international law or enforces international law selectively, then impunity at all levels will thrive. And one of the questions that Minister Lamola asked in that briefing was, where does impunity actually end?
Yeah.
And that is the question that we're really bringing to the fore.
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting point. You know, what we are seeing now is that Israel's impunity is probably at the highest level that we probably have seen. I mean, if you listen to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's comments yesterday with regards to the attack in Doha, he quite frankly said that if any country that is hosting the leadership of Hamas, they will strike them because they feel it's within their right to go ahead and do that. Now, the sovereignty of nations obviously needs to be protected in terms of this, but clearly Netanyahu does not see it that way. How important will international law be in this to try and say, well, there is a line that has to be drawn to end the sort of impunity?
Ultimately, it's international law itself that is on trial. Its application, who does it apply to, and how is it enforced? That is really now the three questions that the bodies of the United Nations, the ICJ, have to be able to respond to. And this is what this conflict in Gaza is really revealing, where you have leaders and influential people saying stuff like, kill them, kill their mother and children, erase their memory. There are no innocents in Gaza. No one deserves to live. These are human animals. Those are the statements that are being made on a daily basis in one way or another by very influential political actors in Israel. And that's why you are seeing the dehumanization of the people of Gaza. Quite frankly, as the minister said yesterday, Gaza is being wiped off the map. And that's the question that really, it's an action that really needs to be tackled. But more sadly is that we did go to the International Court of Justice and we said, at this rate, this is likely to happen. When we went to the International Court of Justice in 2023, in January, there were 21,000 people that have been killed. Today, that number is quadrupled. And that is, by our estimates, the damage is far more than what we are seeing and what we are being told. So really, this moment in time really calls into question the entire existence of the United Nations itself and its ability to ensure that we see sovereign states being treated as sovereigns, ultimately people, regardless of their race, creed, religion, being treated as people. And as Minister Lamola had said in the presentation to Parliament yesterday, the post-World War settlement is under severe pressure. It has never been under this level of pressure before.
Chrispin, I want to touch on what happened yesterday in Parliament. Obviously, we are in a government of national unity. When a government brought this case to the ICJ, it was an ANC-led government. Now, obviously, there are multiple parties that form part of this GNU. And there are parties within the GNU who are completely opposed to the case at the ICJ. How is government being able to still carry on with this case despite parties within this GNU completely opposed to it? And one of those parties, of course, being the Democratic Alliance. There are other parties like the Patriotic Alliance and the Freedom Front that are, of course, completely against this case also. Talk to us about that, given where we are right now at this moment.
So I think the debate yesterday in Parliament centered around not whether this was the right thing to do, but in a sense whether it should have been South Africa that had done it, given some of the geopolitical machinations that we're seeing in the world. And one of the things that we have made clear is that regardless of what government is in place, in terms of the Genocide Convention, as a signatory, we are obliged to ensure that we prevent a genocide where we see it. And that doesn't apply only to our own borders. It applies to the entire notion of a genocide wherever it manifests itself. And so we have to fulfill that obligation. And that's why Minister Lamola said, we are determined to see this case through, because it's an obligation in terms of the Genocide Convention. Otherwise, we should just remove ourselves as signatories from these conventions in future and not expect the international community to act in a similar vein should there be one day a tyrannical government in South Africa that makes apartheid a picnic, which is what we are seeing in Gaza. So, we have that obligation in terms of the Genocide Convention. And regardless of what political parties may say, first of all, the importance also is that in terms of our constitution, executing foreign policy is the domain of the executive. It is not something that we co-share with the judiciary, nor is it something that we co-share with the legislature. Foreign policy has to be executed by the government of the day. And in so doing, we are executing our foreign policy obligations. But as I said earlier, Mr. Patel, and I may say this now, is that executing international law and ensuring that it applies consistently and in a manner that we all agree benefits humanity is actually a national interest. We cannot afford to live in a society where international law is an option. International law and international humanitarian law is in our national interest, because ultimately it is how we ensure that the world is a fairer place. And that is also a foreign policy objective of the government of national unity. It still does believe that we should have a better world and a better Africa.
After the break, I continue my conversation with Chrispin Phiri. We're going to be discussing, of course, the upcoming UN General Assembly that's going to discuss a two-state solution, but also the progress in terms of whether the Israeli embassy is going to close. At this moment, it has been downgraded, but of course, calls from many sectors of society asking the Minister of International Relations and Cooperation, Ronald Lamola, to give an update as to whether there will be a closure with regards to the Israeli embassy. My conversation with Chrispin continues after the break. Welcome back to News in Focus. I'm still in conversation with Chrispin Phiri, who's the spokesperson for the International Relations and Cooperations Department. Again, Chrispin, thank you so much for staying with us. Chrispin, I want to touch on the progress on the Israeli embassy. Where are we in terms of that? Of course, Minister Lamola had said that it will be down to cabinet to make that decision. Of course, there are various sectors of society that are asking that very similar question, some of them even calling for the closure of the Israeli embassy. I'm sure both you and I will remember back towards the end of 2023, there was a unanimous vote within Parliament to go ahead and have this done. Talk to us about it with regards to it.
Yeah, let me preface my response by, again, just reiterating that whilst we respect the views of Parliament, of course, the execution of foreign policy in terms of the Constitution is the domain of the executive. But of course, we remain accountable to Parliament in every way possible. With regards to the closure of the embassy, whilst the petition has been received from Parliament, we are looking at our obligations in terms of international law arising out of the number of advisory opinions that have come out of the ICJ with regards to the occupation of Israel in Palestine, in the West Bank, and the continued violation of human rights in Gaza, what that entails. And it is within that context that our Director General said yesterday, a presentation will be made to Cabinet to consider what type of actions to take. Already as we speak, we have downgraded our embassy in Tel Aviv. So that is quite clear. That's an action that has been taken from our side. But insofar as the embassy here in Johannesburg, the Israeli embassy, of course, that would require a different type of engagement with the Israelis as well themselves, because we cannot unilaterally, of course, close down their embassy. So that is the foreign policy space that is still being explored insofar as what obligations arise because of the current violations of the Israeli regime.
Chrispin, of course, we are going to see the UN General Assembly happen this month, and this is, of course, going to be with discussions to a two-state solution. Government has made it clear that they would like to see this two-state solution occur. It becomes quite difficult when you see what is currently happening in Gaza. Of course, the emptying of Gaza City at this very moment, the displacement that is currently happening at this moment. And the far right of Israel saying, well, quite frankly, we want settlements to occur in Gaza. And just a few weeks ago, we saw the E1 plan, which was given the rubber stamp by the Israeli Knesset to occupy more land within the occupied West Bank. Within Palestine, the discussions are, well, how can we go ahead and even discuss a two-state solution when settlements are continuing to occur from the Israeli side and there is no assistance to the Palestinians with regards to that. So I just wanted to get DIRCO's perspective on this, because even if there's going to be a discussion on a two-state solution, what we're seeing right now from the Israeli government really makes that argument quite difficult to have, even within the United Nations at this moment.
Indeed, and I think you're quite right. We are seeing significant progress on the one end, that there are now a number of states who are mainly Western states, if you want to use that parlance, who are now beginning to say, we need to recognize Palestine as a state, and we are willing to do so. That's a significant shift that the South African government welcomes, and it's a position that we have held for a while. We do believe in a two-state solution, and not only that, that Palestine must be a contiguous state. And what we mean by contiguous is that it cannot be that other parts of the state are lying in a different part, and then another part of the state is completely in a different part, and you have to go through another state to get into your own state. By way of example, those of us who may remember apartheid, Buputatswana was such a state where you could be in Mafikeng, but the other part of Buputatswana is in Pretoria. And so for you to enter into Buputatswana, you have to go through Pretoria. That's not a contiguous state. So we really believe that Palestine should be a contiguous state with East Jerusalem as its capital. But what we are also saying is that there are significant obstacles in place for a two-state solution that have to be addressed first. One is an immediate ceasefire and access to humanitarian aid. Two, we need to ensure that the genocide, as we see it currently, ends in Gaza. And once we have a proper peace plan in place, then we will be able to have a discussion around how do we ensure that this contiguous state that the Palestinians themselves envision ultimately shapes up. And we do believe that that is a conversation that must be had, and that is something that South Africa has already put on the table. You may recall, Faraz, when Minister Lamola appeared at the UN to discuss this matter in a meeting held by France and I think Saudi Arabia.
Yes.
The minister did say that, look, this is something that we welcome. There are, however, significant obstacles that we cannot ignore, and these need to be addressed first before we get into the nitty-gritties about the two-state solution. So, in other words, the symbolic gesture is all well and good, but there's a lot more work that needs to be done to ensure that this becomes a reality.
Crispin, obviously, to see till the end, this is, of course, what Minister Lamola had mentioned yesterday. For those who are watching this and are asking when will that end be, I know it's very difficult for you to answer because these things do take time. But what is DIRCO's estimate timeline from the ICJ in terms of delivering the official pronouncement that what we are seeing, because at this moment, and of course we are discussing it in terms of law, that there's prima facie evidence of a genocide. I think both you and I can say that there is a definite genocide that is going, because what Israel is doing in Gaza meets all of those, for lack of a better word, requirements of a genocide. So in terms of a timeline from DIRCO, what is the expectation from the judges of the ICJ?
So where we are currently is that we have filed our memorandum, which is extremely comprehensive, or memorial, my apologies, our memorial, which is extremely comprehensive, and this has been filed. And because of the volume of evidence that we have brought to the International Court of Justice, Israel asked for an extension to file their memorandum or their memorial. They should have filed their memorial in June. They've asked for an extension, and they've been granted a 6-month extension by the ICJ to file their memorial in January, by January next year. And from there, one then thinks that it depends on the volume of the Israeli regime's documentation and argument. Then the ICJ will be able to set down a case for the merits, a date for the merits, and then the merits will ultimately be heard. So this will take some time, and it's going to be, in the foreseeable future, a case that can easily last beyond the next 2 years. What we do say that in the interim, it is important that we really ensure that the current provisional measures that the court has meted out are respected. But of course, we are seeing that this is something that is not the case. And so we are pleased to some extent that we have seen a number of European countries come around to this effect through Spain leading what is called the Madrid Group. We ourselves are part of a coalition of countries who have agreed to intervene in the ICJ case through the Hague Group to ensure that international law continues to apply and is respected. And this is a matter that we would also definitely take up during the current United Nations General Assembly to ensure that the UN itself champions the existence and promotion of its own court's provisional measures. A failure to do so is a failure to uphold international law.
Crispin, one final question. I guess whenever the final decision comes from the benches of the judges at the ICJ, What would this mean in terms of South Africa standing from a moral perspective, whatever the decision is going to be? I mean, of course, if we were to judge the unanimous decision by the judges last year in January, it's quite clear a similar outcome may occur with regards to this, that Israel, from a legal perspective, is officially committing genocide. But what does it speak of South Africa's moral standing, whatever the outcome is?
Well, I wouldn't want to preempt the judgment in any way. But what I can say is already this case that we have brought has had a significant impact in how the world is analyzing this conflict. And you're seeing genocide scholars coming out and confirming that this is indeed a genocide. You are seeing countries who initially labeled our case as meritless, baseless, and blood libel suddenly being, really called to account around their continued arming of the Israel regime to kill innocent women and children in Gaza. You are seeing a shift, a massive shift in how the world is viewing this conflict. And quite frankly, for a small nation like South Africa to be amongst those who are willing to uphold international law is something that we believe is the right decision and is the type of world that we want to live in, where countries, regardless of their size, regardless of their religious creed or type of countries that they come from, part of the world that they come from, to be willing to say, but international law should apply equally to all of us. And that is rather what we want to be measured by. And the courts will adjudicate the case on the merits. We believe that our case, it has overwhelming evidence of a genocide. As far back as January 2023, we are now 2 years into this matter, and the body of opinion around whether this is a genocide is growing day by day, even from within Israel. Organizations like Physicians for Human Rights and B'Tselem have also come to the conclusion that what we are seeing is genocide. Amnesty International, you name it. There are a number of very, very independent, far removed organizations from the South African government who are calling this what it is.
Chrispin, absolute pleasure having you on. Thank you so much for joining us on News in Focus on Hilaal TV.
Thank you very much.
That's a Chrispin Phiri, spokesperson for the International Relations and Cooperations Department. Well, another big decision or news was delivered yesterday. The NPA says it plans to reopen the inquest into the death of anti-apartheid activist Stephen Biko. I'm going to be speaking with the Secretary General of the Azanian People's Organization, Umbulelo Ketje, with regards to this. Do stay tuned.